Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to have a look at poetry again with Marshall. So Marshall's writing in the 1st century AD and he writes a series of epigrams. In this epigram he's going to be talking about a woman who starts off as a faithful wife and becomes unfaithful. He's a near contemporary of Seneca, so although Marshall's writing in a poetic form, Seneca writes philosophy, the issue of being faithful versus being unfaithful comes up again at a similar time in a similar time frame. So it's quite an interesting one to look at. We'll have a little look at the Latin, the English, and then we'll have a little look at style and form. What's interesting before we get started though is just to quickly have a look at the metre. I've said this before when we looked at Ovid. So elegiac couplets, you don't need to look at the metre too closely to know that they are supposed to be sad. So love elegy is the tradition of writing about love in a way that is mournful. And we'll start to see how that's played with a little bit in the epigrams. So, Castanec antiquis querens Lavinia Sabinis, et quamvis tetraco tristior ipsa viro, dum modo lucrino modo se demitit averno. So, Lavinia, and here her name's not actually at the start. Casta, chaste, is at the beginning, so it's got a little bit of emphasis. And she's compared to the Sabine women, Sabinis, Antiquis. So the word order is a bit interesting, Antiquis Sabinis, and that's an ablative of comparison. Tristior here is sadder, but also more austere, so the idea that she's a little bit more haughty. So it's a word that you know, but you would have probably translated it differently based on the language paper. Viro is man, and here it's husband. So some words you know, but they've been translated a little bit differently. Demitit is like to send down, to send away, so having a dip in the lake. Okay. So vocab you know, but some of the translations are just a little bit out of sync with the language paper. Et dum Baianis saepe fovetor aquis incidit inflammas. Juvenemque secuta relicto. Conjuge Penelope venit, abit Helenae. So again, we have some mythological comparisons with Penelope, and we looked at Penelope a little bit when we looked at Ovid. Actually, if you're grouping these together by theme, it would be quite good to read this epigram and compare it to what Ovid says, because they're writing at different times but using similar imagery and similar references, and the same metre. If you were comparing it for a time period and context, probably compare it with Seneca, because Seneca writes about unfaithful wives in the 1st century AD as well. So if we have a look at the vocab, you'll know saipe is frequently or oftenly, aquis is in the baths or in the waters, flammas, flames, incide is fell, okay, caido, caedere is to fall, incide is fell in. Juvenem is a young man. They've put young gallant. Gallant is a really weird, old-fashioned English word for, like, I guess, an attractive, show-offy kind of man. But Juvenem could just be young man, like, it's fine. Secuta relicto. So, secuta, going off with, being led away. Relicto, leaving behind. So that's from sequor, which is deponent. It looks passive, but it's always active. It's quite interesting. Because she's the one doing the leading then, actually, isn't she? Relicto, the husband having been left. So she is actually active and the husband is passive. Sorry, I'm being a bit nerdy now. Right, language. Venit, she arrived, she came. Abit, she went. Abire, to go away. So lots and lots of vocab you'd know from the language paper. Okay, so let's have a little look at the style. So you've got some frontline emphasis with casta, which means chaste. There's a historical parallel with the Sabine women. The Sabine women, so this is a story from the origins of Rome. The Sabine women are chaste, like they stay faithful to their Sabine husbands until, again, content warning, they are captured and raped by the Romans in order to populate Rome. So they're chaste until they're not. And that kind of foreboding is in the story here. But we have to remember that a Roman concept of consent is miles away from a modern one. And here it's kind of just planting the idea that although she starts off chaste, she won't always be. We've got the comparative tetrico tristior, so like more austere than her own like austere husband. Demitit. So there's a bit of a double entendre, a bit of a double meaning here with demitit. So it's translated as having a dip. Here it's like to lower herself, to send herself down. And it's because she's having a dip, right, in the water. But it could also be to lower herself morally, and that double meaning is possible in Latin as well. So the idea of to stoop to a level that we'd have in English, or to lower yourself, is built into this word demitit. So it's a double entendre. It just means double meaning, and it shouldn't have that many e's. Entendre. My bad, guys. So just check my spelling for me, because I'm terrible at typing. If we have a little look, we've got Fovetor aquis, she like luxuriates in the water, incidi inflammas, but burns in flames. So we've got this antithesis that goes over the line, okay, between being in the water and burning in flames. And that's because it's like flames of passion. It's a theme that you've probably seen a few times. Socuta. And here the word choice, the fact that they choose a deponent which looks passive but is active, could again be a bit of a play on how willing she is or is not in being unfaithful, because it says that she's leading, so it's a bit weird. And relicto is her husband having been left behind. So the word choice of Sakuta is quite interesting. And we do have chiasmus. We've got a proper ABBA structure here, which is nice. Penelope and Helen, both A, both just proper names. And venit abit, third person singular verbs. They're your B's, because they are the same as well. So she came a Penelope, she came really chaste, and she left a Helen. Helen is the famous adulteress of Greek myth, because she leaves her husband Menelaus for the Trojan prince Paris, and as a result the Trojan War breaks out. In different mythological variants as well, Helen is willing and unwilling. So in a really famous telling of Helen's story, Homer's Iliad, Helen does kind of blame Aphrodite for making her go off with Helen. So Helen's choice, Helen's responsibility is also a little bit grey. Okay, but don't get too bogged down in retelling the myth. I said this before when I mentioned Penelope, and I showed you the image of Penelope weaving to keep the suitors at bay in the Ovid video. So go back to the Ovid video if you want another look at that. I'll link it below. But it's a really nice shorthand for saying exactly what Marshall wants to say. And because Marshall's epigrams are short, kind of comical poems that are really kind of satirical and insightful, these little references are really efficient for the Roman reader. Like, we have to work quite hard to unpack them. A Roman reader would know exactly what they mean. She came a Penelope and she left a Helen means she's completely changed and become unfaithful very, very quickly. And Marshall's able to express that very quickly and very neatly using that chiasmus at the end. So there are quite a few effects we could pick out here, and it is quite playful. It's just a little scene of a woman luxuriating at the baths, changing her mind and going off with a young fancy man, or a gallant of all things. But it gives us the impression as well of a wealthy woman. She's got time, she's got leisure time to go and luxuriate in the baths. So again, we're talking about a really similar class of women each time we look at these texts. I hope that was helpful. I'll try and finish the rest of the videos in time for mocks. Best of luck with your revision.